Welcome to our class on Chassidus. We're going to be learning a beautiful Chassidic discourse from the Rebbe. The name of the Chassidic discourse is called ונקדשתי בתוך בני ישראל. The Rebbe said this Chassidic discourse on Shabbos Parshas Emor, and that year was also right before Lag in the year Tafshin Mem Zayin, 37 years ago. So again, the Chassidic discourse is based on the verse in this week's Torah portion where it says, ונקדשתי בתוך בני ישראל. Hashem says, I'm going to be sanctified amongst the Jewish people. And Rebbe said it's known, the Chassidic discourses on this verse, specifically from the Kutei Torah, which is the classical Chassidic discourses from the Alter Rebbe and the Parsha, which we call the Chassidic Torah portion, and also the Chassidic discourses from the Mittler Rebbe, and also the Chassidic discourses from the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, in his classical works called Sefer HaMitzvos, the book of explaining the mitzvahs, and also the Chabad Rebbeim after the Alter Mittler Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek. In other words, what do they explain? Besides the fact that from this verse we learn the commandment of going on Kiddush Hashem, self-sacrifice for Hashem, but also it says in the Zohar that this commandment is to sanctify Hashem every day. In other words, every single day we have to go on self-sacrifice. So how do you go on self-sacrifice every day? So it explains we do it by saying Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh in our prayers, and we say afterwards Baruch Kvoid Hashem Koimoi. So we say those two prayers every day, and as an introduction to Shema, and later on the Shemona Esrei. So that's how, according to Isaiah, we fill the commandment of going on Mesiras Nefesh every day. And it's explained in the Chassidic discourses what Chazal tell us in the Talmud in Tractate Chulin, that there are three groups of angels that every single day they praise of Hashem. One says Kadosh once, another one says Kadosh Kadosh twice, and the third one says Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh 3 times Hashem Tzvakos. That's what it says in the Talmud. And it's explained, the author explains in the Kutei Torah that these three levels are the three levels of the angels that say Kadosh, and they explains it on a spiritual level. One is Melmata Lamayla, you're elevating the world. One is Melmayla Lamata, to bring it down. And the other one is going on Mesiras Nefesh B'chol Moedcha. And again, the author explains at length the spiritual significance of what it says in the Talmud about the three different levels of the angels. Okay. The Rebbe says, but nevertheless, in this explanation, there's actually two different types of explanations that to explain the Chassidic discourses, and we don't actually pay attention to it. And like we mentioned many, many times, that simple things people don't pay attention to, the simplicity of life. In other words, if you look at the Talmud in Tractate Chulin, where it says that there's three groups of angels, that one says Kadosh, and the other one says twice Kadosh, and the other one says three times Kadosh. So it's the same word. One is saying it once, one is saying it twice, and one is saying it 3 times. But if you look in the Chassidic discourse, the way he explains the different levels, it's actually referring to not just Kadosh, Kadosh, and Kadosh, the same word saying it once, twice, or 3 times, but it's a different level of Kadosh. Like we explained, the Alter Rebbe said the first one is elevating the world, the other one is bringing light into the world, the other one is Mesiras Nefesh. So we have to understand the difference between these two ideas. Where either they're just quantitatively adding to Kadosh, it's the same idea, or it's 3 different types of serving Hashem. So Rabbi explains and he says as follows. It's brought down the Chassidic discourses that what is the first level of Kadosh? It's referring to the level of self-sacrifice. What type of self-sacrifice? The union of Av and Aim, which we know is Chachma and Bina. So that's the first level. The first level of self-sacrifice, as we know, Chachma is on one side, Bina is on the other side. When you unite Chachma and Bina, that's self-sacrifice for Chachma and for Bina. That's the first Kadosh. What is the second Kadosh? Is referring to learning Torah. Learning Torah is also a level of self-sacrifice. And the third level of Kadosh is referring to our mitzvahs, our physical mitzvahs. And these 3 levels of the union of Chachma and Bina, learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, those are the 3 pillars that the world stands on, which is learning Torah, charity, which is all the mitzvahs, and prayer. So in other words, so based on this, it's literally every Kaddish has its own thing and its own place. Everything has its own identity. And like we see literally, because we know clearly there's a time for prayer, and there's a time for Torah study, and there's time for doing mitzvot, and there's time for dealing with worldly affairs. So you see, everything has its own place. And like it's brought down in the Talmud, Jerusalem Talmud, in reference to Rashbi of Shimon Yochai, that he was someone that always learned Torah. He was dedicated to learning Torah. And he actually had to stop to go ahead and to build a sukkah and to shake the Lulav Esrog. So what do you see? That Torah is its own world, and he stopped to do a different world of doing mitzvahs. And he had to literally pause from the world that he's in. So you see that prayer is one world, Torah is another world, and mitzvahs is another world. In other words, you can say the reason on a spiritual level that even though he stopped to do a mitzvah, he still called somebody that his whole occupation was learning Torah. Why? Because his learning Torah never really stopped. He stopped to do a mitzvah because his learning Torah continued even while he was doing the mitzvah. In other words, so the Torah never ended by him. So even though he paused and he took a break, but Torah was penetrating through his experience of doing the mitzvah. That's in reference to Rabbi Shimon Yochai. And there's the same thing also we find in reference to Rabbi Yehuda, where it says in the Mishnah and the Talmud that he would pray only once in 30 days. In other words, so what does that mean? He didn't pray? No, because his prayer wasn't a way that for the 30 days that he wasn't praying, the prayer was taking place, even though he technically wasn't praying at that moment. In other words, not only the effect of the prayer, but literally the prayer was happening even while he wasn't praying. Where do we find this? Like it's brought down there. Gives a practical example that, for example, it says that on Pesach, we don't make a shechianu, which is the blessing that we say when something new happens, a whole Pesach. Why don't we make a shechianu every day? Because the shechianu from the beginning of the Yom Tov, that lasts the whole Yom Tov. So just like shechianu from the beginning of the lasts the whole Yom Tov, the same thing also, his prayer once in 30 days lasts the whole 30 days. But nevertheless, what do we see from here? That it's two different worlds. In other words, there's the world of Torah, and there's the world of action. And like we see, like the case of Rashbi, he was learning Torah and he had to stop to do a mitzvah, or like from the story from Yehuda, where he prayed and then he stopped to do a mitzvah. And you see, it's two different spiritual works and two different times and two different energies. And just like, for example, the example that Rebbe gave in the holiday of Pesach, even though the blessing of Shechianu, you do it in the beginning, but it lasts the whole Pesach, so you see that it has an effect in everything you're doing the whole Pesach, and eating the matzah, and etc. So in other words, what the point I was trying to bring out from here, that what did we learn before? That Kadosh, one is Mesiras Nefesh, one is learning Torah, one is doing mitzvahs, one is praying. So you see that every one is its own Kadosh, it's unique, it's separate. But this that we say, that one group of angels says once Kaddish, one said it twice, and one said it 3 times. So what do we see? That's combining it all together, and they're all happening at once. So on one hand, we're saying is that they're each separate, and the other hand, we're saying no, it's all one, based on the simple meaning from the Talmud. One said once, twice, 3 times, that they bunched it all together. Rebbe said he'd like to connect this with the spiritual work of the Rashbi, of Shimon Yochai, where when the Rebbe said the Chassidic discourse, the next day was the Yortzeit of Shimon Yochai, Lag Ba'omar, and he says it's known, the explanation, the author explains L'Kutei Torah, that how is it that the Rashbi, he kept the mitzvahs in the cave, he was in the cave for all those years. How did he keep the mitzvahs? In other words, he couldn't eat physical matzah, he didn't have matzah, materially. Now, even you're going to say, 1 second, he's okay. He was in the cave. He had no matzah, so he's someone that's technically exempt. He's exempt. He doesn't have it. How can he do it? But nevertheless, that's true. Let's say somebody's in a situation, for whatever reason, they're in a faraway place, and not intentionally, and they're not around for Pesach, and there's no way for them to matzah. They really would love to eat matzah. They want to eat matzah, but they don't have the matzah. Guess what? What do we say? We say that oinus, someone that unfortunately against his will, against her will, against the person's will, they don't have the opportunity to do a mitzvah, so the Torah says, fine, you're exempt. But there's another expression that says, "Command the Ovid lo yamrinon." True, you're exempt, but you can say that you fulfilled drawing in that light. You're exempt. He says, "Okay, fine. We're not going to hold it against you." But bottom line is, you didn't draw in the light. So if the question is, how did the Rashbi go without doing mitzvahs? How come he wasn't able to draw the light in? Yes, he was exempt, but he wasn't able to draw the light in. So how did he go all these years without doing the mitzvahs? And it's explained that yes, he did the mitzvahs. How did he do the mitzvahs? On a spiritual level. He did the mitzvahs on a spiritual level. And like for example, that it says that, like it's explained, it says on a spiritual level that the soul of Rashbi was in the level of the Leviathan. What is the Leviathan? It comes from the word Yilava, Ishialai, where basically it's cleaving to Hashem. In other words, he was able to unify Chachma and Bina, intellect, the two levels of intellect. He was able to have the level of self-sacrifice, and therefore, because he was in such a high level, he unified Chachma and Bina, and he was Mesiras Nefesh, he was able to fulfill the mitzvahs, what? On a spiritual level. Now, the Rebbe says, 1 second. Amazing. The Rashbi was a very high level, and he fulfilled the mitzvahs on a spiritual level. But the question is, 1 second, why didn't he fulfill the mitzvahs on a materialistic level? Why didn't he eat matzah? How's he have matzah? Guess what? We're talking to Rashbi. He was a miracle man. He could have made miracles, and he would have had matzah by him. In materialistic world, in finite calculations, yeah, he was in a cave. He had no access to it, but he could have made a miracle. Matzahs would have showed up. He would have had the matzah. He would have had a sukkah. He would have had a lulav. He would have had anything he needed. And like, for example, the Rebbe brings in the famous story in the prophets that the prophet Elijah, that he ate, and then he was going on a trip, and he didn't eat for 40 days. And the food from the first day lasted him for 40 days. Now, how is that possible? You can't live without eating for 40 days because it was a miracle. And not only that was one miracle with Elijah. Another miracle is that the ravens brought him bread, and they brought it to him from the house of Achav. And that itself was a miracle. That the bread they brought him was specifically from the house of Achav. But it's another whole discussion about that miracle within the miracle. But what do you see from the story of Elijah? That he was able to do a miracle, and he was able to not eat for 40 days, or the ravens brought him the food. And especially according to, by the Rashbi, we know that there was a miracle in reference to his eating and drinking. Because we know the fact is there was a miracle there, and all of a sudden he had a tree, a carob tree, and all of a sudden there was a stream of water that came there. So guess what? He could have had the same way he had a miracle that the carob tree was there, and the water was there. He could have had all of a sudden a sukkah show up, and a lulav show up, and for Pesach and Matzah, everything that he needed would have showed up. Now, it's a side note, which is an important note. There says that some people say that stream of water that provided the Rashbi in his cave water, that stream, or the flow of it, still exists. And the same thing also, that tree, or a child, an offshoot of that tree, still exists in Pekian, in Eretz Yisrael. So next time you go to Eretz Yisrael, take a trip to Pekian, and look for the stream, and look for the carob tree. Okay, so the question then is, if that's the case, so why didn't Hashem do a miracle for him? They should have his matzah and his sukkah and his lulav and all the stuff he needed. So the Rebbe says, but this we'll understand this based on what's explained elsewhere, that when a person has to do a mitzvah, a materialistic mitzvah, and I'll say in Hebrew, a mitzvah begashmias, you have to do a materialistic mitzvah, so you have to do it based on a physical nature. In other words, if you have to do a spiritual mitzvah, fine, but you have to do a physical mitzvah, it has to be done in a physical way. And it's known, the famous story of the previous Rebbe, that he said about the first Chabad Alter Rebbe, that when he was in prison, and he wanted to go ahead and he wanted to sanctify the moon, when he was traveling on the boat in the river, and he did not want, and the non-Jew that was driving the boat didn't want to stop. So what happened was the Alter Rebbe stopped the boat, and it was a miracle. And then after he stopped it, he didn't do Kiddush Levana. He stopped it, and the non-Jew saw that the Alter Rebbe has the power to stop it. Then he allowed it to go again, and then he asked the non-Jew he should stop the boat on his own. So the question is asked, what do you mean? If the Alter Rebbe stopped the boat, he should have done Kiddush Levana. And if he wasn't going to do it, so why did he stop the boat? But what did he want? In other words, he wanted, to stop the boat, to show him that he can stop the boat. And then it went going. And then when the non-Jew stopped, that's when he had Kiddush Levana. That's when he sanctified the moon. Why? Because when you come to sanctifying the moon, which you have to do it, yes, what you can't do when the boat is moving, because you basically when you're sanctifying the moon, you basically accept you're going to greet Hashem and because when it comes to doing a mitzvah, you have to do a mitzvah in a materialistic way, and it has to be done in a natural materialistic way, and that's why the Alter wanted specifically the boat should be stopped by the captain. And that's why the Rashbi, even though, yes, you don't think the Rashbi could have pulled in matzah, he could have pulled in a sukkah, lulav, he could have pulled anything he wanted, but when you're dealing with the physical mitzvah, the matzah, it has to come in a natural physical way. Food, you have to eat. It's not a mitzvah to eat, you have to eat to survive. So that he did a miracle for it. To drink, he needed to drink. So he did a miracle for that. But when it comes to a mitzvah is not done in a miraculous way. He'd like to connect this with the days of Sfiras Omer, counting the Omer, because we know that when it comes to bring the sacrifice to Omer, so the verse says, "Mimoy shvoy seichem," which means from the place that you're dwelling, and it has to be specifically from the place that you're dwelling. Like the verse says clearly, when you'll come to the land and you're going to bring the Omer, and so what is that? You have to bring it from the place that you have to bring it from Eretz Yisrael. And up to the point, there's actually a question in the Talmud: what happens if wheat came from the clouds? In other words, are they kosher for the bread that's brought for Shavuos? But why? Because it says "Mimoy second from your dwelling," and here it came from the cloud. In other words, now it could have came from the cloud in two ways. One is a miracle. All of a sudden, boom, the cloud sends down wheat, or the clouds blew it in from a place outside Israel into Israel. So what do you see from here? That since it has to be Moshe when you live in, it has to grow in Israel. It can't come from a cloud that's bringing it from a miracle or from another place. Why? Because it has to come from the physical place. And you can say that that's the whole idea of Sfiras Omer, counting the Omer. What does it say in the verse? You should count from the day after Shabbat, which is referring to the day after Pesach, first day Pesach. You count 7 weeks. In other words, what's the whole purpose of counting? The whole purpose of counting is elevating the world. In Kabbalistic terms, it has to be done in a natural way. And there's one day and another day until you have 7 complete weeks. So what do you see from here? When it comes to doing a mitzvah, it's all about transforming self, transforming the physical world. So what do we see from here? That the main purpose of serving Hashem has to be done in a natural way and a physical way. And therefore, the mitzvah of the Rashbi in the cave wasn't done in a miraculous way, and it was not done in a miraculous way that he had it in a physical level. But he still wanted to have the spiritual connection, so he did it on a spiritual level. Like we said, Leviathan, that means he connected to Hashem. But to go ahead and do it in a physical way through a miracle, then obviously that's not the purpose. So based on this, Rebbe explains that you could say that by the Rashbi, there was 2 types of serving Hashem. In other words, when he was in the cave, so then how did he serve Hashem? All spiritual stuff. So therefore, because it was all spiritual, then you can have all 3 can be together. Because in spiritual, there's no delineation between right, left, middle, higher, lower. It's spiritual, therefore you can have it all 3 together. In other words, you can have learning Torah, you can have prayer, you can have mitzvot, all in one pot. Why? Because in all of them, it's all about connecting to Hashem. Just like, for example, self-sacrifice. That even his learning Torah and his doing mitzvahs in the cave was also in a level of self-sacrifice. Like he says, B'chad Katiris Katarna, he connected to Hashem in one connection. And that's the explanation where it says that one group says Kadosh, 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 meaning they're saying the same word, they're saying it multiple times, because on a spiritual level, yes, the angels can do it all together, even though this is prayer, and this is Torah study, and this is mitzvot, when on a spiritual level, it can all be united. However, when he left the cave, and over there, you have to do a mitzvah, and you have to do it in a physical way, and you have to learn Torah and sit down and learn Torah, and it has to be done in a physical way, materialistic way, literally, and that's where you have the separation between the time for prayer, the time for Torah study, and the time for doing mitzvahs. So what Rebbe is explaining is that if you're dealing with on a spiritual level, yes, there's Torah, there's prayer, and there's mitzvah, that can all be done together on a spiritual level. But when it comes in the physical world, there's time to pray, and there's time to Torah study, and there's time to do mitzvahs. Rebbe finishes up and he says, just like the way it was by the Rashbi. So the same thing also, this comes down to every single one of the Jewish people. That there's a separate time, that for each thing, there's a time to learn Torah and praying, doing mitzvahs. But then again, on a spiritual level, there's a time when it's all unified together. So there's two different avodas. We all have the spiritual part of us that we can do it all together, but the physical part that we have to do each one separate. And this comes down, and especially, as the Rebbe said, the Chassidic discourse was right before Lag and Lag all the energy of Rashbi come down to this world, and it gets revealed in the physical world, and he affects tremendous blessings and blessings and yeshuot in the world, up to the point where it's called the day of his celebration of the Rashbi. And when we do our spiritual work, in those praying, and learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, will come to the fulfillment, where it says in the beginning of the next week's Torah portion, Ki savoyu al aretz, we're all going to enter the land, Eretz Yisrael, and b'shafsa aretz Shabbos LaHashem, the land is going to rest to Hashem, and we're going to have the 6 years of working the land, and all referring to the great blessings of the land of Israel. Notice it should happen b'pashtus, not in the spiritual we should have the land of Israel, but literally we should have the land of Israel, b'mheira v'yameinu mamash, quickly in our days, but again, not in a spiritual, but mamash, literally in a physical way. Here we have again another beautiful Chassidic discourse of the Rebbe, and he shows us how, on one hand, yes, from a spiritual level, it's Torah, prayer, mitzvahs, it's all amazing, it's all good, but the ultimate goal is to bring it down to this physical world, and that's where you need real Torah, real prayer, real mitzvahs, and like Rebbe finishes off, the physical part of the land of Israel, Mashiach Tzidkenu. Have a great and blessed week, and let's hope and pray next week's class will be in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. Have a good week.